Subcommittee will come to order. Members present will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the official hearing record. Without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 calendar days to allow statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. Asia-Pacific nations are predicted to consume more than half the world's energy by the year 2035, bringing both enormous opportunities and significant challenges as the global energy sector seeks to meet the demand. As Asia continues to diversify from traditional energy to nuclear, liquefied natural gas, and solar power, innovative U.S. suppliers of energy and energy-based technology stand to play a pivotal role. Today, we'll discuss U.S. policy toward the ever-developing Asia-Pacific region as it hungers to fulfill its energy needs. This hearing will focus on energy demand, production, consumption, security, and policy in the Asia-Pacific region. As we assess the challenges and the opportunities, it's important to note that over 700 million people in the Asia and the Pacific region lack access to electricity, and nearly 2 billion burn wood, dung, and waste for cooking and heating needs. As Asia continues to modernize and develop a substantial middle class, demand for energy will increase exponentially, requiring vast investments in infrastructure. Energy demand in Asia is largely fueled by enormous populations, urbanization, and the transportation industry. Newly mobilized and politically active populations are driven first and foremost by whether governments are able to provide for a better standard of living, a factor driven almost entirely by access to dependable and affordable energy. Demand will continue to rise by an estimated 2.5% annually, with oil and gas to remain the prevailing energy source. East Asia has become a net oil importer, causing a close association of energy needs with national security concerns. Much of Asia's energy is imported from volatile regions and is transported through vulnerable transit corridors, most notably including the highly disputed South China Sea. This subcommittee has closely followed the issues of the South China Sea and the insecurities of nations who rely on energy transit through these narrow straits, and we believe those concerns are well-founded. Add to that the estimates of oil and natural gas reserves in South China Sea with their own highly disputed sovereignty rights, and as we're all aware, these territorial disputes are very complicated and will take time to resolve. We continue to urge China and others to respect the rule of international law and agreed upon frameworks for dispute resolution rather than resorting to manipulation and bullying tactics. As diverse cultures and national boundaries affect much of the energy infrastructure, regional energy cooperation is paramount, but many Asian nations appear to be more interested in a go-it-alone approach. Attempts have been made to collaborate on energy issues within Asia for some time now, including cooperation initiatives through ASEAN and the East China Summit. These dialogues are just that, talks. Region-wide hesitance to pursue multilateral development projects and persistent territorial disputes that hinder the efficient use of resources have prevented Asian states from working together to resolve energy conundrums. Energy options are limited throughout much of Asia, and the fact remains that the regional cooperation will be necessary to overcome the conundrum of energy shortage. Currently, coal is the region's leading energy source, but market demand for nuclear and liquefied natural gas continues to rise. Skepticism of nuclear energy following Japan's Fukushima disaster remains a concern, but a thirst for nuclear power thrives in many of the Asian nations. The U.S. has various degrees of civil nuclear cooperation in the region with China, South Korea, India, Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, and Thailand. Many in the United States have concerns with some of these projects, in particular with regard to nuclear proliferation and dual-use repurposing. For our part, the United States began shale gas exports by sea this year and is projected to become the third largest world supplier of LNG within 5 years. Asian buyers have already contracted to purchase more than half of U.S. energy supply of LNG and will continue to affect global energy policy on a massive scale. The Asia-Pacific needs American leadership to to assist with the security concerns of our partners and allies, to maintain the rule of law and freedom of navigation crucial for energy security, and to provide critical energy supplies and access to new energy technologies. We should advocate for policies that encourage a market-driven approach to fill the demand, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on how best to facilitate that outcome. And I'd like to turn the time over to Ranking Member Sherman for any comments he might have.
The gentlelady from New York will give her opening statement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Salmon and Ranking Member Sherman, for calling this timely hearing. Asia as a whole is the largest energy consuming region in the world. China is the single largest energy consumer, followed by the US and then India. In a world where our energy needs only increase with each passing year, we must take stock of our resources and assess our ability to fulfill those needs, while ensuring our security and minimizing the environmental consequences. Asia's growing energy needs leave many open questions, including how well positioned these countries are to fulfilling their commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and what the geopolitical implications are for Asia's current energy reliance on coal and Middle East oil. I welcome our distinguished panelists today and look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman?
When we look at energy in Asia, we see a number of foreign policy and national security concerns. The first of these is the price of oil, for reasons that God may explain to us at some point in the future. He has put oil in so many of the wrong places. And anything that drives down the price of oil is not just good for motorists in my district, it is good for American foreign policy. Second, global warming. China emits twice as much greenhouse gases as the United States. We're in second place, but we are a distant second. China has made this great announcement with much pageantry that they'll keep increasing their greenhouse gases right up until 2030, and then maybe without any enforcement, they'll turn the corner, although we have no idea how high up they'll go before they turn the corner, and we do not know whether they'll turn the corner very sharply at all. If you look at the current situation, China is deploying and building many coal-fired electric plants. Those plants will serve their full useful life, and coal produces twice the greenhouse gases per kilowatt as any other fuel. And so one would expect that these plants will be turning out an awful lot of greenhouse gases for a long time. In addition, China's going all over the world building coal-fired electric plants. And while technically this is not Chinese global warming, because the burning of the coal will take place elsewhere, it would not occur but for these plants. Next, the next national security issue is the transport of particularly oil to our allies in Asia. And here I think there's an exaggeration of the risk and the problem. We're both in Beijing and in Washington, we're firing up nationalist concerns about, oh my God, can we figure out a way that both countries can justify a larger military by fighting over these islets, uninhabited islets. And we're told that trillions of dollars worth of trade passes close to these disputed islets. Keep in mind, almost all of that trade is going in or out of a Chinese port. And if China were able to establish naval bases on these islets, they would be able to blockade their own ports, something that is not particularly of concern to the United States. But in addition, there are oil tankers from the Middle East going to Japan and South Korea. Those tankers may choose to go close to these islets, but they, in a worst-case scenario, and they should never have to do this, but in a worst-case scenario, they could take a slightly different route and go far away from these islets. These islets, therefore, have a massively exaggerated strategic importance, since virtually no trade that doesn't go in or out of Chinese ports goes close to them. And Then there is the economic issue. Much of the reason for this hearing is to discuss the export of American natural gas. Keep in mind that there are two ways to look at this from an economic standpoint. One is to say, hey, if you export some natural gas, that creates jobs in the natural gas industry. The other approach is to say, if you refuse to export natural gas, you drive down the price of natural gas in this country, you give American manufacturers a big leg up on their Asian competition, and then you get a lot of manufacturing jobs. There are more jobs involved in using natural gas than in producing natural gas. Finally, as I think is illustrated by this hearing, there's the discussion that by exporting natural gas, we could have an effect on Europe and Ukraine's, in particular, dependence on Russia. Russia is charging far less for natural gas than Asia is willing to pay. So if we're going to export natural gas and we're going to remain a free market country, we're going to export natural gas to Asia, where it will have the economic effects I've described, both good and perhaps undercutting our manufacturers. But we're not going to be exporting natural gas to Europe, where they're used to paying far less to Russia for it than the Japanese and the South Koreans are willing to pay. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. Energy is a passion of mine. American energy independence, energy renaissance that we've experienced is something that I've advocated for. I was glad to hear Mr. Sherman mention natural gas, and it is a fossil fuel that we have an abundance of here in this country, and the export of natural gas is critical to the American energy sector. And when you have an abundance of something, then you can put it out on the market, and the companies can realize a profit, which will, I think, help keep jobs here in this country. Asia is definitely a growing area that needs not only energy to provide that 24/7 baseload power needed to manufacture and help with the quality of life issues. It's really a global phenomenon when you talk about quality of life issues. If you want to improve the quality of life of people all over the globe, you do it with energy. Mosquitoes, we talk a lot about Zika. If you want to cut down the threat of Zika, then help provide energy, electricity, so they can have air conditioning in their house. They don't have to have the windows open at night because mosquitoes are prone to come in. We can do that in sub-Saharan Africa. We can do that in Latin America and a lot of other places that don't experience the same sort of energy abundance that we have. 24/7 baseload power provided by fossil fuels, provided nuclear power, hydroelectric. But one thing that, going back to the natural gas, is an abundant supply here that can provide natural gas powered electricity generation in third world countries and in Asia, not necessarily third world, but definitely improve the quality of life. Too many people around the world are using wood and charcoal to heat their homes and cook their food, and they can't keep food for a long period of time fresh. They can't have air conditioning, we talked about. There's just so many different things that we can use American energy to help improve the lives of other people around the world. You know, we push wind and solar. I think it's groovy technology. I really do like it, but it's intermittent. It doesn't provide the 24/7 baseload power that helps keep incubators running, that help with the neonatal intensive care, and we have an infant mortality rate that's too high around the world, when we have the ability to provide energy sources such as natural gas to help those countries keep those incubators running, keep those neonatal intensive care units operating, that you're not going to get with intermittent power. So I'm glad that we're having a discussion about energy and improving the quality of life of people around the globe. Focused on Asia right now, and I'm glad of that. So I look forward to a robust discussion as we move forward in this Congress and the next Congress to provide energy through American energy resources, as we hopefully will reboot our energy renaissance in this country. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We're joined today by Mr. Michael Herbert, Senior Advisor and Director of Energy Security Program at the National Bureau of Asian Research. Thanks for coming today, Michael, and he happens to come from a wonderful place, Arizona, so glad to have you here. The rest of the country is great, too. It's just Arizona's better, right?
I like it. I like
All
it,
right.
yeah.
Dr. David Kreutzer, Senior Research Fellow for Energy Economics and Climate Change at Heritage Foundation Institute for Economic Freedom and Opportunity. Thank you for being here. And Mr. Jake Schmidt, Director of International Program at the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're thrilled to have you all here today, and Michael, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Salmon, Ranking Member Sherman, committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about Asia's growing energy consumption, some of the implications, U.S. policy, U.S. supplies, what role it can play. I think it's worthwhile keeping in mind there's a fundamental dilemma that Asia faces in energy. It's a kind of a dual challenge. On the one hand, developing Asia, energy demand is growing at extraordinarily high rates. You've talked about that. It'll account for 2/3 of global energy consumption growth. Clearly, they're scrambling to mobilize the energy supplies they need and to prevent energy from becoming a bottleneck to economic growth and job creation. And these are developing countries, need the jobs and pushing for development. At the same time, they're looking for affordable energy because remember, these are developing countries and they're looking to find affordable energy. And I think here's a key to understanding that coal dilemma for Asia. And third, at the same time they meet all this booming demand, they have to shift from a very carbon, coal-intensive energy mix in the region to a much cleaner energy mix if they're going to meet their climate goals and probably more importantly, meet their air pollution goals, which in China, India, Southeast Asia, air pollution is a deadly, quite truly deadly problem, obviously for China. But the challenge is how to meet that growing energy demand that they need now, but shift to this cleaner energy mix when they need the energy now. And so what happens is there's a chronic temptation to default to what is an abundant, cheap, available energy supply all across Asia, and that's coal, to meet that growing electricity demand. So the pressure to clean up the energy mix, but the pressure to have affordable energy leads to this problem of constant defaulting to coal. And that gets in the way of all these environmental and climate goals that we have. U.S. energy policy and supplies can make a big difference in both energy security in Asia, already has in a big way, but can also play a big role in Asia's transition out of this dominant role for coal and towards a cleaner energy mix. And in my mind, there's no contradiction between using natural gas and making progress on meeting towards your climate goal. Just a few metrics. If you look at how much energy demand is going to grow in just developing Asia, it's the equivalent of adding another China energy consumption to the global energy mix just in the next 20 years. Remember, China is the largest energy consumer in the world. Just the increase is equivalent, or at least the latest International Energy Agency forecast, just the increase is equal almost to today's entire China energy consumption. So these are big numbers, 2/3 of CO2 emissions, most of the world's nuclear capacity growth, most of the natural gas growth, and all of the coal consumption growth. So this is a truly staggering scale to this. Now, to switch to the energy security in Asia is national security. It's not like here. I mean, this is at the top or near the top of the strategic agenda. The region imports 2/3 of its coal. China imports 60% of its oil supplies, or the region imports 2/3 of its oil. China 60%, and that continues to rise. 100% for Japan, South Korea. So this is really a serious strategic concern for the region. And the other dimension of that is the growing and heavy dependence on Middle East supplies. And this is where the sea lanes come in. China gets half of their imports from the Middle East. Japan and South Korea get 85% of their imported oil from the Middle East. So these sea lanes between the Persian Gulf and Asia are critical sea lanes. And not only the South China Sea today, but also increasingly the Indian Ocean, as China's blue water capacity begins to be able to project into the Indian Ocean. They're building I don't want to be an alarmist about this because I'm not, but China's building a little Navy base at Djibouti now, which is part of their concern about the security of those sea lanes, particularly for their oil supplies. What role can the U.S. play in this? Obviously, the sea lanes issue were the most important player, and we can have a dialogue about the South China Sea, how important they are. I agree with Ranking Member Sherman that China's not going to block their own sea lanes. That makes no sense whatsoever. But here's the issue. If you go to Tokyo, the notion of turning over the security of their oil and LNG supply lines to the Chinese Navy, the tender mercies of the Chinese Navy, makes them very nervous. Now, we can argue about whether that's a reasonable concern or not, but I can tell you it's a very worrying notion for planners in Tokyo. U.S. unconventional oil supplies are critical for Asia because they are bringing down prices, giving them an alternative supply. So anything we can do to continue to grow our conventional oil production will be good for Asia's energy security. Similarly with natural gas, LNG supplies to Asia allow them to diversify their supplies away from Southeast Asia and the Middle East. So all of these things are going to be very important to the metrics of energy security for Asia, things we can do. Continue to work with China on energy cooperation. India will be the largest absolute increase in energy consumption. We need to do more with India in the future. So let me just stop with those brief remarks and let the others go ahead.
Thank you. We're going to probably be called to vote in the next 15 minutes or so, and we'd like to get through all the witnesses and at least get a stab at some questions. But and it's the last votes of the day, so probably won't reconvene afterwards. The little box in front of you usually tells you the time frames.
I got it. I'm good with
Okay. When it goes amber, that means just like we drive faster.
Yeah. No. When it goes to amber, I say the end.
And red beans stop.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Chairman Salmon and Ranking Member Sherman, I want to thank you and the other members of the committee for giving me an opportunity to address you today about the opportunities for American energy. My name is David Kreutzer. I'm Senior Research Fellow in Energy Economics and Climate Change at the Heritage Foundation. However, what I say today should not be construed as an official position of the Heritage Foundation. They're my own views. America is an energy powerhouse. The last decade has seen a phenomenal transformation. As recently as 2008, petroleum was trading at over $140 per barrel. Natural gas was over $10 per million BTU. As oil and gas production was waning a decade ago, the peak oilers were in ascendance. The President Obama joined them in their pessimism. He loudly proclaimed that because we only had 2% of the world's resources, we could not continue to sustain our energy consumption. Further, he said we cannot drill our way to lower gasoline prices. And on a more personal note, I was all but called a liar at a House budget hearing in September of 2008 for proposing that we have a target for increasing petroleum production by 2 million barrels a day. One of the members held a letter from the head of the Energy Information Administration saying that even if we could do that, we wouldn't get more than a couple of dollars or a few dollars gain in price. Well, we were all wrong. From 2008 to 2015, America doubled its petroleum production. Natural gas production went up by about 60%. Not only did prices fall more than the $20 I was hoping for, they're $100 below the peak level in 2008 right now. Today, the U.S. is the world's top producer of petroleum and natural gas. However, this energy revolution took place in the face of a hostile environment. The Obama administration, within weeks of taking office, canceled already completed oil and gas leases in the Southwest. They essentially, within a year, put a moratorium on not only deep water drilling, but shallow water drilling as well offshore. They started the clock. They tore up the 5-year energy plan, which further delayed access to resources on the federal estate. Perhaps most telling was the attitude of an EPA administrator in Texas who, taking his version of ancient history, claimed that when the Romans went into a town, they would crucify the first 2 people they found so as to get everybody else to fall in line, and he used that analogy for his strategy and regulation. It's on tape. It shouldn't be surprising in the face of this sort of attitude towards energy production that the energy revolution we have seen has taken place on almost exclusively on state and private land. Asia's growing hunger for energy and U.S. supply opportunities depend on us being able to produce more. And if we had positive pro-energy policies, it would be interesting to see what sort of results we could get from that, whether for domestic consumption or for strategic reasons. Moving forward with energy policy requires that we open up more of the federal estate than we have to get better access to the resources that we own. To get an idea of what would happen if we did that, we at the Heritage Foundation, we have a clone of the Energy Information Administration's National Energy Modeling System, we ran their high resource case through the macro model and compared it to the reference case. And I should note that the high resource case in 2008, its projections for last year were more accurate than the reference case was. What we find, the high resource case essentially assumes there's a 50% greater access to energy. The resources are 50% greater. When we ran that model, we found that between now and 2035, aggregate GDP in the US would go up by $3.7 trillion. A nominal family of 4 over that same period would see $40,000 additional income. That is roughly $2,000 per year. On average, the difference in employment is 700,000 jobs to the good if we have 50% greater access to energy. Households would spend 10% less on electricity. And all of this without increasing federal expenditure or taxation. So I would make a plea to the committee to consider proposing policies that would give greater access to our energy resources owned by the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Salmon, Ranking Member Sherman, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me on behalf of the Natural Resource Defense Council to present my views on the energy opportunities and challenges for the Asia region. This region, as was mentioned, is one of the fastest growing energy markets in the coming decades. So the actions that this region takes on clean energy and climate change will be critical in helping the world move to a climate safe trajectory. This region has a huge opportunity to expand renewable energy and energy efficiency, and the United States has an important role to play in helping this region develop its energy future in a responsible and environmentally sound manner. I'll hit on 3 points from my full written testimony to summarize. First, there's a new dynamic emerging in the Asia region as reflected in the historic Paris Agreement. This agreement includes new climate commitments from all the major countries in the world, including the countries in the Asia region. The countries in the Asia region are already showing that they are prepared to help this agreement deliver over time. There is, I would say, a very high likelihood that we will reach the threshold for this agreement to enter into force this year. We have now 59 countries that account for more than 60% of the world's emissions that have formally said that they will join this agreement this year. Just last week, China and the United States both formally took that step to join this agreement. And we expect that more countries in the Asia region will do that step this year as well. So key countries, as a part of this, have put forward robust climate and clean energy targets as a part of the Paris Agreement. 187 countries responsible for more than 97% of the world's emissions put forward climate pollution targets as a part of this Paris Agreement, including all the countries and major countries in the Asia region. Second, this region is a major market for clean energy, and this opportunity is poised for significant expansion. The Asia region has witnessed a huge uptick in clean energy deployment in the past few years. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, clean energy investment in the Asia-Pacific region totaled $161 billion in 2015, an increase of almost 700% since 2005. The current climate targets including those contained in the Paris Agreement, mean that Asia's largest economies are committing themselves to clean energy goals and implementing the necessary domestic actions to meet these goals. Significant renewable energy expansion is expected in China, India, and other countries in the region as a result. As a result, the deployment of clean energy in the Asia region is projected to continue to surge in the coming years. Again, according to Bloomberg Energy Finance, renewable energy will make up nearly 2/3, or $3.6 trillion, of the electricity capacity added over the next 25 years in the Asia-Pacific region. Lastly, what can the United States do to help with this clean energy revolution in the Asia region? The U.S. can embark, I think, on 3 key actions, many of which are building blocks that the U.S. has already been delivering over time. First, the U.S. has active climate and clean energy bilateral agreements with a number of countries in the region, including China and India. The U.S. should strengthen the bilateral clean energy efforts with these countries. At the same time, the U.S. should further develop bilateral clean energy efforts with others in the region, such as Indonesia and Vietnam, since both countries have large untapped renewable energy potential. Second, it is important to ensure that countries create both the right policy framework and the right finance dynamics to attract the needed private sector investments in clean energy space. For example, my organization, NRDC, has found that new innovative finance models like green banks and green bonds can help unleash even larger amounts of private capital over time. The U.S. should play a key role in helping countries in the Asia region put in place better policy and finance frameworks for clean energy. Third, by mobilizing U.S. investments for clean energy, the U.S. helps create growing clean energy markets in the Asia region. The U.S. should continue to fund contributions to the GCF. At the same time, the U.S. can help to mobilize additional investment through such mechanisms as the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, its trade missions, and other venues where the U.S. helps to catalyze these private sector investments. So to conclude, in our opinion, the U.S. can help the Asian countries meet their growing energy needs in a low-carbon and environmentally responsible manner. This effort can create new markets for renewable energy and energy efficiency companies and workers, help secure a more stable region, and protect all Americans from the devastating impacts that will occur if we don't act aggressively on climate change. Thank you.
Given the fact that we are on kind of a truncated time frame here, I'm going to limit members' questions to 2 minutes. I apologize for doing so. Normally, we're pretty liberal with that, but I think we'll just need to do that so everybody gets an opportunity. With the opening of the U.S. shale revolution, America has become a global supplier of LNG. Adding American natural gas to the global market has helped diversify supplies and reduce the price of natural gas, both home and abroad, especially in Asia, which was once the most expensive market in the world. The expansion of the Panama Canal should also add to the ease of LNG shipments abroad. Are the regulations on shale gas production and exports sufficiently open to facilitate free market flow of LNG? If not, what hindrances still remain for the industry? And aside from regulations, what's the state of infrastructure to facilitate these exports? Anybody want to try a stab at that? Dr. Kreutzer, go ahead.
I think the bulk of the heavy lifting has been done on that. I would recommend we move, simplify the process of getting these LNG terminals approved. It's very, takes much too long. So I think we should simplify that process. There are some shipping regulations, I'm not familiar with all the details of it, that would make shipping a little bit easier, but I think the heavy lifting is getting these things approved. We made a lot of progress, but we need to speed that up. The canal makes that a lot easier to ship that stuff. Europe will be able to use some of that LNG, and I think as they build their regas terminals in Europe, they'll also be able to use it. So I don't see any huge barriers.
Typically, how long does it take to approve one of these permits?
Well, it's gone on for about 5 years. Some of them have taken, the early ones took up to 2 years to get approvals before the DOE approved this as in the national interest to export these supplies of gas. They've begun to speed that process up administratively, and they've tried to let FERC do the work first and then the DOE. But I think that process could be speeded up a great deal more.
Okay, Dr. Kreutzer.
Yeah, I was just thinking the regulatory problem is more on the production of gas than I think on the export terminals at this point. And there seems to be creeping additional regulations on methane and other things, and that's worth watching.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Sherman.
Dr. Kreitzer pointed out that we've had a decline in energy prices in the entire world, and but I don't think we can attribute that just to U.S. production. We've had a recession in the world. We have conservation in other countries, but obviously it has helped the world price to reduce to increase production in the United States. And one thing I think the environmental community loses track of, they may focus on an individual production in the United States or project and say, look at the local environmental effect, but also look at the world price effect. If we can drive down the price of oil and diminish the world's dependence upon the Middle East, we might avoid the next Iraq war and the environmental degradation that involves. I do also want to comment that we haven't talked much about nuclear, but we're seeing Japan, South Korea, and China looking to reprocess spent fuel. That makes no economic sense. The only reason that South Korea or Japan would do it is to open the door to becoming nuclear nuclear weapon states at some point in the future if they wanted to go down that road. I want to talk about solar panels. China is subsidizing and taking market share. That puts some of our companies at a disadvantage. On the other hand, it drives down the price of solar panels and increases their utilization. Mr. Schmidt, should we be upset that China is selling its solar panels for too little, or rejoice in the fact that more solar panels are being deployed in more places?
It's a good question. I may not give you the yes and no answer that you're looking for. I think fundamentally there's been some shifts occurring within the Chinese market on this dynamic, and I think that the world of a year or 2 years ago is not exactly the world of today in terms of low-cost solar being dumped by the Chinese for one particular reason. Part of that dynamic was being driven at a time when the Chinese were at a very early stage in terms of their domestic deployment of their solar panels. So, about 4 years ago, the vast majority of China's panel production, which was a massive amount at the time and has grown since, was actually for being used in export markets in Europe and elsewhere, and that caused a lot of these trade tensions and so forth. That dynamic has shifted quite a bit. China now is installing about 20 gigawatts of solar a year, which is clearly head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of their own domestic deployment. And so much more of the Chinese domestic sort of production is actually being used within their own domestic context. We think it's obviously really critical that we get this right. I'm not sure that sort of trade disputes over this is necessarily the best way to solve it. I know that the Obama administration has sought sort of some recourse through some of the routes with India and elsewhere. But what we're finding is that it's really critical that we actually get these prices to a low point.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Duncan. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's two factors, economic factors, that affect the price of energy, supply and demand. And what we saw in the United States was an increase of supply based on the Bakken and Eagle Ford and Barnett and all these other energy producing areas, and even Pennsylvania and New York and Ohio, increased production. And so you have supply go up locally in the United States, but also global supply goes up because the Saudis saw the Bakken eating into their market share, so they increased production in defiance of OPEC. And so you had this, and you still see it today, an increase of supply, global supply of oil and natural gas. Then the other factor is demand. Global demand is down because the economy globally has softened. In the United States, we just saw GDP growth is 1.1, and adjusted in the first quarter down below 1 to 0.08. So the economy is soft. Nothing has rebounded. So demand is down as well. So you've got increased supply and less demand. You're going to have low oil prices and low energy prices altogether. The question I have is TPP. So we're exporting and trying to increase LNG exports, but you also have signatories to TPP that are LNG exporters as well. I wonder how TPP is going to factor in, assuming it passes, in the United States' ability to compete with the Asian countries that are LNG exporters currently. So if anybody could speak to that, because that's a question I don't have the answer for.
I don't have a good answer for that.
I mean, I can, I mean, as a fact of how the TPP and all trade agreements, once a trade agreement like the TPP goes into effect, the ability for the United States, all these countries become sort of effectively de facto within the free trade, and so the Department of Energy's national interest determination is taken off the table, and so any of these countries would now be sort of subject to this. Obviously, Japan and South Korea, well, you know, are big sort of potential demanders of LNG, and so they're a part of it. Vietnam, I don't think, is a major sort of potential hub for exports of LNG. So it probably could, in theory, have a larger impacts. I suspect, having spent a lot of time working in these countries, that the actual amount of demand for LNG is much lower than many people would expect, as you know, countries aren't necessarily looking to sort of flip out their dependence on the Middle East for a dependence on some other you know, form of energy. There's obviously a sort of large interest in a lot of these countries to get a lot more homegrown energy and sort of become a bit more energy independent to some extent, which is you see in China and India as they sort of look to coal imports versus coal domestically versus oil imports versus oil domestically.
Can I just add one little bit? I missed the point of your question, but to the extent the TPP is a free trade agreement, the whole DOE approval process was about permitting exports to non-free trade agreement countries. So once the TPP were to pass, then that opens the door to exporting wherever you want. You don't have to go through that DOE.
Well, just as a side comment, OPEC is a determining factor over the price of energy. So whether you have a free trade agreement or not, the price of energy is going to be set by somebody that's not a signatory to the TPP. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay. Ms. Mung.
Chairman Salmon's one of the few people who pronounce my name according to Chinese tradition, and it always throws me off. Thank you.
You know, I know that, and I realized even after I said it, you know, I speak Mandarin. I lived over in Taiwan, and so I have a really hard time, you know, like saying Wang instead of Wong or Chen instead of Chun, and so I'm kind of stuck with the you know, Chinese pronunciation. So I apologize.
It's great.
But
it's great.
anyway, Chair recognizes you anyway.
Thank you so much.
I'm Connolly over here.
Connolly. Asian countries may need more types of equipment and technology in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How can the United States capitalize on some of these needs, maybe to produce more jobs and exports in the United States?
Well, excuse me. I think our goal is going to be to provide them, you know, we've developed technology in a lot of areas that they've been able to adapt, you know, for telephones and everything else. I don't think it's going to be, we're going to have to push it too hard. When we develop the technology, they'll use it. I think the critical question is we need to also develop the energy so that it's not coming from places that are politically unstable and antagonistic.
Yeah, and just to add a bit more, I think, maybe I'm an American optimist, but I think that many of the technologies that these countries are going to be seeking to deploy when you look across energy efficiency, renewables, are places where the Americans do quite well. For example, in India, some of the very first solar projects that really started to boom were produced by First Solar, based in Arizona. And so that's, you know, obviously a huge opportunity. The fastest growing place for job creation in the United States is within the clean energy space. And, you know, I guess we feel that the U.S. has a huge opportunity to play a role in helping these countries you know, meet their energy needs through renewables and energy efficiency, and that will create the sort of downstream supply jobs and so forth that creates, you know, huge benefits for Americans across the board. And, you know, as an anecdote, often the perception is that, you know, countries, even in China where they produce a lot of their own things, American technologies are always viewed as kind of the best, the gold standard, and so they tend to want to get the best and the gold standard in places, and, you know, I think that the Americans can compete pretty well.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly, if you want to be a Republican today, I'll recognize you next. Otherwise, I have to recognize Ms. Gabbard.
You know, there's an old line of a song, you know, kind of goes like that, you know, are you a Republican? I am right now.
Well, then I recognize you.
No, I'll wait my fair turn, but thank you,
Ms.
Mr. Chairman.
Gabbard.
Thank you, and thank you for your kindness. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the strategic implications of the energy mix right now occurring in Asia, how that may be driving or influencing some of the maritime disputes that are occurring there.
I think that the role of energy in some of these maritime disputes is a little bit overestimated sometimes and over-dramatized. Say, take the South China Sea. The likely resources there, we don't know a lot about them, but estimates for the U.S. side are relatively modest in terms of the resources there. Certainly not worth fighting over. Now, Chinese estimates are 3 or 4 times ours, so you wonder maybe they really believe there's more there than there are. I think the bigger dimension of that is the sea lanes issue, because so much of Asia's, Northeast Asia in particular, oil and LNG flows through those sea lanes. That's the bigger game and the bigger concern, as I mentioned, for Northeast Asians about who controls those sea lanes, even though I think it's kind of a doomsday scenario to think they'd start getting in the way of those shipments. But I can tell you from being out there a lot, this worries a lot of the folks in Northeast Asia as a strategic concern. You know, they want the U.S. Navy to still be a big force in those sea lanes for the security of their oil supply.
Thank you.
I would hope that our energy policy be more focused on allowing the energy producers to produce energy when they can produce it at a cost less than the price at which they sell it. When we start forcing strategic concerns on energy producers, then at Heritage we think that you get a pretty slippery slope to where should we be subsidizing this, should we, and that's, we wouldn't propose that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
I would just comment that now the oil tankers to Japan and South Korea would tend to go west of the Philippines. If they rerouted themselves and went east of the Philippines, that might add, I've heard estimates of 1 cent per gallon to what consumers in Japan and South Korea have to pay. So the doomsday scenario is 1 cent a gallon. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lowenthal.
Pronounce my name right, and I'm very pleased.
I couldn't really think of another pronunciation for yours.
Chinese pronunciation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to continue this discussion on renewables in the region. And first, I want to know, you know, with the recent signing, the United States and China, the joining on the Paris Climate, do you feel that the Chinese are going to be able to transition their energy mix away from coal towards renewable sources, enable to meet its ambitious goals? Will they be actually able to do this, or are they going to really, is this a doable thing, Mr. Schmidt?
I guess we believe that it is. It won't be an easy challenge for them, but to give you, I guess, a couple of anecdotes. If anyone that's been in China, air pollution's really bad.
Yeah, we were there in,
Yep.
and we couldn't breathe in Beijing. Could not breathe, actually.
So you feel the exact same thing that Chinese Communist Party officials feel and that everyday citizens feel. And so the number one social unrest issue right now in China is local air pollution challenges, and that has risen quite a bit. And so I think we've seen a huge...
Yeah, we know that there is that. You're right. I think you have pointed out, rightfully so, that the Chinese are very much aware. I'm just saying, is it really possible, though, given the existing state and reliance on coal, to really do that transition in the time?
Yes, and to give you a couple of facts from recent, so the last 2 years, China has actually had a declining coal consumption year on year. This is the first time that that's happened in 10 years. That's a huge trend from a growing 7% per year to an actual declining amount of coal. The expectations are that this year will continue that trend. The first quarter of this year saw declining coal consumption, and we've seen huge shifts. Yes, China is still building a number of coal plants. They don't have a market economy, as everyone knows. But what you're finding is that the vast majority of these coal plants are actually sitting idle. So they're running at about 40 to 50% capacity factors, which for anyone that knows coal is a very bad economic investment, to invest a lot in a very heavy capital investment and then to only run it less than half the time. And so I think we're seeing a huge decline in China's coal consumption, which is very tied to their carbon pollution. And so we're quite confident that China's CO2 emissions will peak well before 2030. There is some debate within sort of energy modelers about whether or not China's emissions have actually already peaked. And, you know, obviously they need a set of policies and continued sort of efforts over time to make sure to deliver.
Can I just,
Thank you, Mr. Connolly.
well, just to add one point.
Oh.
The forcing issue for China is not so much climate, it's air pollution in the cities in the East Coast.
Right.
And this is an existential issue for the Communist Party. They can't hide this. They can put people in jail and other stuff. They can't hide the bad air. And so that is forcing a pace of change by the Communist leadership and this contributors to the air pollution, particularly coal, that is much faster than I think many people anticipated. And I think you can underestimate it.
They really got under their skin, I know, when the State Department started publishing on a daily basis
Yeah.
those,
Air
those
quality,
numbers.
yeah.
And it really got under their skin. I know I was there at one of those times. The other thing, first time I went to Beijing, had a white shirt on. By the end of the day, the collar was completely black. It's pretty bad. Mr. Connolly.
Well, first time I went to Beijing was in 1986, and there were a lot of bicycles in Beijing. And then I went there in March this year, and there were a lot of BMWs and Toyotas and whatever. And part of the problem too was in the Maoist period, they built a lot of like steel plants, I think, outside of Beijing to showcase the industrial might of Communist China. And of course, sitting in a basin, it created huge pollution that now they would never do, but they're stuck with it. Plus normal urban pollution. Mr. Schmidt, and gentlemen, you could comment too, but when I was there in March, one of the bright sides of the bilateral relationship that I frankly did not realize the extent of was enormous cooperation apparently going on between our two governments on environmental and technological breakthroughs to try to address pollution, to try to curb both air pollution, water pollution, ground pollution, to look at new techniques that are environmentally neutral or friendly. And that apparently, the Chinese government is quite aggressive about this. They're not being dragged into it. And the collaboration's quite real and has a lot of promise. And I was glad to hear that, given so many other aspects of the bilateral relationship. Want to comment just a little bit about that before we all have to go and vote?
Yeah, I think one of the bright spots of the U.S.-China relationship over the past couple of years has been clearly on climate, and that's not just for me. If you ask sort of general Asian hands, they clearly view that relationship is quite well and quite well established. And it was, I think, a very critical component of getting the Paris Agreement delivered, was the sort of relationship between those two. And that's both at, I think, a political level, which is around negotiating agreements and so forth, but also on the sort of practical, how do we actually do this stuff? And so the U.S. has a very active working group working with the Chinese on helping them deliver on, grid integration, high voltage transmission, electric vehicles, and the set of things that gets back to the other speakers' questions about how can American companies kind of play in that. And I think there is, just an ongoing great relationship between the two. It's always fraught with tensions, but within the clean energy space, I think it's a very positive engagement that can kind of continue to build and go to the next level.
So I would add drinkable water as a problem too, because even in the very finest hotels, you need filtered water.
I would say that one of the surprising things is that we've already developed the technology to reduce particulate emissions from coal plants by over 99%. And my understanding is that in some places in China, they have the pollution control turned off because there's a slight parasitism of the energy. So I'm unfortunately, a little pessimistic that they're going to push forward with other technologies that would be more costly. And I'm really surprised that they haven't already used the on-the-shelf technology that's already been developed that could dramatically reduce the pollution from even the coal that they're using.
Thanks. We've got to get over for votes, but I'm going to allow one last follow-up question, Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Herberg, obviously they care about air pollution in their major cities. Can they build coal-fired plants either a few hundred miles west of their major cities in the less urbanized, or can they put them right on the beach in some windy area where it's all, can they solve their their air pollution problem without helping the world solve its coal/global warming problem?
They are moving plants to the west, you know, and that's one of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back parts of China's policy. You know, allowing building in the west, but stopping it in the east. But even so, I think and in the east, tailpipe emissions are replacing, you know, coal emissions in the power plant. So I don't underestimate the scale of this thing. But in all the major cities, even as you head west, the pollution problem has become a political, social problem for them. And that's the forcing dynamic.
My hope is they can't solve their problem without also hoping the world solve its problem.
Well,
I'll yield back.
you kind of get a 1-for-1 CO2 benefit from the air pollution effort. That's why I'm assuming.
I thank the panelists very much for being here today. It's been very edifying and very informative. Committee's adjourned.